Take a moment to think of a time when you committed a morally wrong act. How did it make you feel? Could you justify the act and get on with your life, or did it sit low in your stomach for a while? The viewpoints of moral relativism and moral absolutism can help us understand the nature of morality in reference to our lives and our actions. Moral relativism can be perceived as valid because of the arguments of situational morality, cultural relativism, and perception of necessary evils. Moral absolutism, on the other hand, can be perceived as valid because of moral experiences, radical freedom in the absence of absolutism, and moral communications. I'll now present 3 arguments for the cases of moral relativism, the first of which is the situation of situational morality. Moral relativism is the belief that morality, goodness and badness, rightness and wrongness, are all relative to the situation at hand and the people involved. So the first argument that I claim is that every situation is subject to interpretation. This means that the value of a moral is based on the situation at hand, and since situations are relative, morals must be relative too. The second argument is cultural relativism. So different societies obviously have different moral codes. For example, the Yanomami tribe of the Amazon rainforest are known for endocannibalism. Here they're seen, sorry, this is a bad picture. This is them eating a mixture of fermented bananas and ashes. But this is an important ritual for them that they feel helps their tribe members continue on into the afterlife. So in the U.S., this would be grossly immoral and not to mention insane, but for the Yanomami tribe, endocannibalism is a way of life, and it's critical to preserving their tradition. So there's no moral standard that can be used to judge one society is better than another. The moral code of our own society is no more morally high than another's moral code. Both are relative and are held objectively higher by members of the aforementioned society than another one being observed. It's relative to mention that even though American egoism would have us to believe otherwise, we can't say within good conscience that our society is objectively better than another with a different way of life. We're not better societies, we're just different. It's also to be said that there is no universal truth in ethics. So for example, there are certain situations which qualify as cases of necessity. In these instances, it's only right to break a moral absolute in favor of a relative perspective in order to maximize the preservation of life and thus happiness. I'll touch on this more in a later argument. The moral code of a society determines rightness and wrongness. It cannot be studied by an outsider with the same mindset that their own culture endows upon them. We can't examine, for example, the Yanomami tribe with our own cultural biases. We have to attempt to see the world through their eyes, with their traditions, their heritage, and their culture in mind. As such, we have to have an attitude of tolerance toward other societies. Relativism is the only point of view which allows for variances in morality across cultural lines and is the most culturally sensitive viewpoint. The third argument I present in favor of relativism is that of cases of necessity. So let's have an example that a skier is going down a slope that will eventually cause an avalanche and will kill at least 10 people. The only way to stop the avalanche from occurring is to shoot the skier. Should you? A relativist would say yes. Even though one ought not to kill the innocent, a relativist would say that preserving 10 human lives, and thus their happiness, is worth more than one simple human life. Assuming that the skier had no homicidal intentions, though, the absolutist would say that they should not kill the skier, even though the avalanche would result in a greater death toll. To say otherwise, that they would kill a skier, would violate an absolute moral norm, to never intentionally kill the innocent. You may be more familiar, in our case, with killing shoot every class period, for the sake of Hunter and children. It's important to note that in tricky situations like these, a relativist would most likely reason as a utilitarian. This means that an act is determined as good or bad based on the consequences of the action. For the relativist, it's not the consequences of the act that determine its moral rightness or wrongness, but instead, it's a given society's view of the act that makes it right or wrong. I'll now lay out my 3 arguments in favor of absolutism. Moral absolutism is the belief that there are moral norms, absolutely, that should never be violated, regardless of the situation at hand, the people involved, and the culture that it's set in. So my first argument in favor of absolutism is that of moral communication. The entire principle of relativism is founded on the idea that we're not capable of arguing about what constitutes a moral absolute, that we're only capable of discussing how we feel about something and not how something truly is. But that's not really true. We're all capable of hosting moral discussion with an objective of defining moral absolutes. Thus, moral absolutism must be true. For example, we as a people are capable of arguing over the morality of abortion, euthanasia, world hunger. Any major issue can be argued about with the goal of finding an absolute in it. The very fact that we can entertain an argument about a topic indicates that we're naturally driven toward the goal of discovering, defining, and defending moral absolutes, and thus we should hold these absolutes to be true and enact them in our daily lives. The second argument for absolutism is that of personal moral experience. So everyone knows that little devil on your shoulder and the other shoulder has a little angel, but this is your internal conscience. So we have an internal compass in the form of our innate conscience that tells us if we commit acts when they're good or when they're bad. You have a feeling in your gut, in the pit of your stomach, outlining what am I doing and is it right? Thus, we should rely on this conscience to guide us in favor of rightness and away from wrongness. We should not rely on society's view of morality, like in relativism, because this could be swayed by cultural differences and don't give way to the fact that there are absolute truths. The third argument I present in favor of absolutism is that of radical freedom, and it comes from a flaw in the relativist perspective. Without concrete rules, heinous acts are permissible, and the people who commit them are free of all associated guilt with the acts. A prime example of this phenomenon is that of the Holocaust. So Adolf Hitler genuinely thought that he was doing the right thing for his country by facilitating and enforcing mass genocide. In his own personal moral code, by a relativist perspective, he was completely in the right because he honestly felt as if his actions were justified. Now remember, the relativists rely on feeling, not on absolutes. But by an absolutist perspective, he was morally responsible for the genocide and torture of 6 million innocent people and broke multiple absolute moral laws. So together we've explored various different facets of morality through the lenses of moral relativism and moral absolutism. Because of the arguments of situational morality, cultural relativism, and the perception of necessary evils, you might think that moral relativist is the best way to go. But because of moral experience, radical moral freedom in the absence of absolutism, and moral communication, we can think that absolutism might be true as well. So I presented you with 3 arguments for relativism and 3 for absolutism, but I can't tell you where to put these into your own life. From here on out, you get to decide how you personally identify yourself, as a relativist or as an absolutist.